She didn't flinch when the divorce papers slapped her face. She didn't break when his mistress appeared on the stairs wearing her robe. And she didn't utter a single word until he leaned in, smug, certain he had destroyed her. That was his mistake. Because the woman he thought was powerless, she picked up a phone she swore she'd never use again. And with one call, the world he built on her back began to crumble. He thought he ended a marriage. He had no idea he had just awakened something far more dangerous. And what happened next, he never saw coming. The papers hit her face so hard the edges stung. Not because they were thick. Bill would never risk spending money on quality paper for something as simple as discarding his wife, but because he threw them with the full force of a man who wanted a wound, not in a marriage. They struck her cheek, slid down her jaw, and landed at her feet like fallen ash. Paula didn't move, not even when one page caught on her heel, not even when he exhaled in annoyance, as if her lack of reaction was the true insult, as if she owed him the courtesy of breaking apart in front of him. The foyer glowed with warm Christmas lights, golden, soft, elegant, lights she had chosen, arranged, and set herself because Bill had been too busy to help decorate the home she bought, furnished, and maintained. It didn't matter. None of it mattered now, because in the center of that holiday glow, her husband stood like a stranger holding a weapon made of ink and cowardice. Behind him, the towering staircase framed a scene she would have called impossible a year ago. But not today. Today, the impossible was standing barefoot on the marble steps, wearing Paula's silk robe, the ivory one embroidered with roses, the one Bill claimed was too expensive when she bought it, the one she always saved for special nights. And the girl had the audacity to smile. Not shyly, not nervously, not even with an ounce of shame. No, she smiled like a victor claiming her prize. "Paula," Bill said, tugging at the cufflinks she'd bought him for their 10th anniversary. "This doesn't need to be dramatic. Just sign the papers and leave. You have," he glanced at his watch, 24 hours to vacate the house. Her house. She blinked once. He continued speaking, words dripping with the arrogance of a man convinced his actions were righteous. The sound of his voice blurred into a dull roar in her ears. Not because she was weak or shocked or shattered, but because her mind, long dormant, long quiet, long silenced by love, had begun to shift, like gears that had been waiting, turning, clicking into place. He mistook her silence for heartbreak. He mistook her stillness for fragility. And when he mistook those things, he leaned closer, delivering the final blow with the smug confidence of a man announcing a promotion rather than a betrayal. "My girlfriend deserves this house more than you." The girl on the stairs giggled. The robe swished around her bare legs. She leaned her head against Bill's shoulder, as if she had the right. And Paula still did not cry. She felt her fingers twitch, though, just slightly, against the divorce papers at her feet. Bill noticed. He smirked. "There it is," he said. "The emotion I was waiting for. Go on. Say something." Paula inhaled slowly. The air tasted like pine from the Christmas tree, cinnamon from the candles she had lit, and betrayal. Sharp, metallic, unmistakable. She bent down, not quickly, not frantically, but with the deliberate grace of someone picking up something far more valuable than a stack of legal documents. The papers rustled softly as she gathered them. Her wedding ring caught the light, scattering tiny shards of gold across the marble. For a moment, she studied the ring the way one studies an artifact from a forgotten kingdom. A symbol of loyalty, a symbol of sacrifice, a symbol of a woman who had spent years shrinking so the man she loved could stand tall. When she straightened, the room felt colder, her heartbeat steadier, her vision clearer, and her voice, when it finally came, was soft enough that Bill had to lean in to hear it. That was his second mistake. "You have no idea what you've just started," she whispered. A tiny sentence, barely a breath, but the temperature in the foyer shifted with it. The lights flickered. The girl on the stairs stopped smiling, because those words did not sound like heartbreak. They sounded like a warning, a quiet threat, a promise, a countdown. Bill scoffed. "This again? Don't start with your dramatics." But something in Paula's eyes stopped him. Not tears, Not fury. Something worse. A kind of calm that shouldn't exist inside a woman so thoroughly humiliated moments before. She stepped forward. Her heels clicked softly against the marble, measured, controlled, unfazed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't tremble. She didn't lash out. She simply handed the papers back to him. "Pick them up," he said, confused. "No," she replied. "You threw them at me. They belong to you." The girl shifted nervously. Bill frowned. Paula moved past him, graceful, collected, dangerously quiet. A woman walking through the ruins of something she once cherished, assessing the damage, calculating a response. But she didn't look defeated. She looked awakened. She looked like someone remembering who she was before she became Bill's wife. At the center of the foyer, she turned, her silhouette framed by the glow of the Christmas tree. Snowflakes drifted outside the tall windows behind her, falling gently, silently, beautifully, mocking the ugliness staining the room. Bill crossed his arms. "So what? You think you're going to fight this? Paula, be reasonable. You leave tonight. Gloria," he gestured at the girl, "is staying." Paula studied Gloria for a long, painful moment. The robe, the bare feet, the triumphant smile she had earlier. All of it told a story. A story of a woman who thought she'd won. A story of a woman who didn't know the battlefield she'd stepped into. A story of a woman who didn't understand that quiet women were not weak. They were just storing ammunition. Finally, Paula said, "Enjoy the robe. It's the last thing of mine you'll ever wear." Gloria's smile faltered. Paula took one last slow breath. Not the breath of a broken wife, but the breath of a woman who had just remembered she owned the ground her enemies were standing on. She walked toward the guest room. No rush, no slamming doors, no theatrics. Simply leaving. But Bill felt something then. He didn't say it. He didn't admit it. But for a moment, his chest tightened. Because Paula wasn't acting like a woman abandoned. She was acting like a storm forming. Quiet, controlled, inevitable. And somewhere deep inside, a truth surfaced. He hadn't ended anything. He had ignited something. He had started something. He had awakened something. And Paula rose, walking silently down the hallway, shoulders squared, steps steady, was no longer the woman who would plead, beg, or break. She was the woman who whispered warnings that felt like fate. "You have no idea what you've just started." He didn't, but he would. Soon. Welcome my beautiful family and friends to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, share, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now back to the story. The guest room door closed behind her with a soft click. A delicate, almost apologetic sound, too gentle for the storm rising inside Paula's chest. This was the room Bill had pushed her into months ago, when space had become his excuse for cruelty. 4 bare walls, a single dresser, and a bed too stiff for comfort. It was the kind of room reserved for temporary guests, not a wife. But tonight, it felt different. Not like exile, more like a war room. The silence was heavy, thick with everything she had endured, everything she had forgiven, everything she had swallowed because she believed marriage required endurance, not awakening. But endurance had ended tonight. Her hands trembled as she stepped inside. Not from fear. Fear had died the moment he threw the divorce papers at her. No, this trembling was the first spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Power. The real kind. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't scream or threaten or break things. The kind that builds kingdoms and tears them down. She walked to the nightstand and opened a drawer. Inside was a tiny, unremarkable burner phone she thought she'd never touch again. It looked harmless, almost pathetic, cheap plastic, worn buttons, a faint crack down the side. But Paula knew better. This phone was a key to a door she had locked years ago, to a life she had sworn she would never return to the part of herself Bill never met, the part he never imagined existed. She held it in her palm for a long moment, breathing through the memories that came roaring back. Her mother's warnings, her siblings' power, her family's legacy, the old, dangerous, unspoken kind. The part of her bloodline that didn't need violence to destroy a man. They used something far sharper. Information. Paula sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress groaned beneath her, It springs old and weary. She was not weary. She dialed a number her fingers remembered, even after years of trying to forget it. The ringing began, low, steady, merciless. Once, twice, a third time, a click, a breath. Then a familiar voice, deep and controlled, spoke into her ear. Paula, her brother. Daniel rose. The sibling she loved. The sibling she feared. The sibling everyone feared. She hadn't spoken to him in 5 years. Not because of anger, though anger existed, but because she had wanted a normal life. A quiet marriage. A simple existence far from the throne she was born into. She had married Bill to escape the intensity of the roses. She had chosen smallness, thinking it meant peace. She had chosen simplicity, thinking it would protect her heart. But simplicity had not protected her. It had made her a target. Paula, Daniel repeated, the tension sharpening. Are you safe? Her hand tightened around the phone. Yes, she said, voice steady. But I won't be if I stay quiet. Daniel inhaled, a single measured breath. Anyone else might have missed it. Paula didn't. That breath meant calculation, movement, strategy, things she hadn't allowed herself to be part of since the day she vowed to build a life outside the shadow of her family's power. What do you need? Daniel asked. For a moment, Paula didn't speak. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud meant something irreversible. It meant going back. It meant lifting the veil she had dropped the day she married Bill. It meant opening a chapter that never truly closed. Finally, she whispered the words that immediately shifted the world around her. Pull every file. Daniel said nothing. Every document, Paula continued, her voice gaining weight. Every deed, every contract, every investment, every share. His silence grew colder. She pushed forward. I want them tonight. A long, deep pause followed. So long she could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. Daniel wasn't shocked. Daniel didn't get shocked. He was attentive, alert, awake. Understood, he said at last. Which target? Paula closed her eyes. Upstairs, she heard faint footsteps. Soft laughter, Bill's. Then Gloria's. Her blood heated, but she stayed calm. This isn't just a target, Paula said. This is a reclamation. Daniel exhaled sharply through his nose. So it's him. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was confirmation. Daniel spoke again, his tone now formal, cold, dangerous. You walked away from this world, Paula. From all of us. From the power you were born with. You said you wanted normal. I did, she murmured. And now? She looked around the guest room. The room of exile, of humiliation, of forced smallness. Her gaze drifted to the mirror on the wall. For the first time in months, she saw herself clearly. Not the wife shrinking into emptiness. Not the woman begging for scraps of affection. Not the shadow Bill had shaped her into. She saw the rose. Elegant. Silent. Deadly when crossed. Now, Paula said softly, I want what's mine. Daniel's tone shifted instantly. The way a sky changes before a storm. The way a blade glints before it strikes. Then you'll have it. She swallowed. You're not going to ask why. No, Daniel replied. I don't care why. I care that you're calling me. And I care that whoever pushed you to this is already in danger. A chill slid down her spine. Not fear. Recognition. This was the world she left behind. The world where loyalty was fierce, love was sharp, and consequences were immediate. Paula, Daniel added, tell me one thing. Do you want this quietly, or do you want this remembered? The question hovered in the air. Quietly meant precision. Surgical. Invisible. Remembered meant destruction. Public. Unrecoverable. Paula's fingers trembled again, this time with clarity. Quietly, she said. For now. For now. Daniel repeated, as though storing those words somewhere lethal. In the background, she heard keys clacking, files opening, names being scanned. The rose machine had begun moving, and once it moved, it did not stop. Paula stood, shutting the drawer. Her heart was no longer trembling. It was steady, strong, awake. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel chuckled once, dark, amused, knowing. Don't thank me, he said. Thank the man who underestimated you. The call ended. Paula placed the phone down. The air in the room felt lighter, but she felt heavier, rooted, grounded, anchored in a version of herself she thought she'd lost. Upstairs, Bill laughed again. He believed he'd won. He believed she was powerless. He believed the meekness she showed him was real. He believed her silence meant defeat. He believed her retreat meant surrender. But Paula Rose was not retreating. She was remembering who she was, who she came from, what she was capable of, what she owned, what she built, and above all, what she was about to reclaim. The past she thought she'd buried was no longer a secret. It was her greatest weapon, and for the first time in years, Paula smiled. Morning came reluctantly, as if even the sun sensed something monumental waiting beneath its light. Snow still clung to the windows, glittering along the glass like frost-laced warnings. The house felt unnaturally still, too quiet for a home that had once pulsed with laughter, warmth, and Paula's soft footsteps. Bill didn't notice the shift. He strutted through the hallway with a mug of coffee Gloria had made, wearing his robe. Her robe, he corrected himself with a smirk, thinking the worst was already behind him. He thought last night was the climax. He thought throwing her out had been the final blow. He thought the papers, the humiliation, the mistress in the robe, that was the end. He didn't know it was only the invitation. The doorbell rang. A single, sharp chime. Bill frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. He didn't like surprises that weren't his own creation. Gloria peeked around the corner. "Should I answer it?" she asked, voice dripping with the false sweetness she believed made her irresistible. "No, I'll do it," he said, straightening his robe, Paula's robe, and smoothing back his hair. He opened the door with the arrogance of a man expecting to intimidate whoever stood on the other side. But intimidation died in his throat. Two figures stepped in, brushing past him without waiting for permission. Daniel Rose. Catherine Rose. Names he had never bothered to say out loud. People he never truly asked Paula about. Titles he never cared to understand. Daniel removed his gloves with slow, deliberate precision. The kind of precision belonging to someone used to dismantling billion-dollar corporations with a single signature. Catherine set her briefcase down with the quiet authority of a federal judge feared by criminals, CEOs, politicians, and anyone foolish enough to underestimate her. Bill stepped back involuntarily. What are you doing here?" he stammered. Daniel gave him a thin smile. Paula called. Something cold slid down Bill's spine. He hadn't even known Paula had siblings. He'd met a few cousins at the wedding, but she always kept her family lines blurred, her story modest, her background intentionally quiet. He thought that meant she came from nothing. He assumed her silence was shame. He assumed her humility meant insignificance. And now the consequences of his assumptions removed their coats and stepped into his foyer as if they owned it. Catherine glanced around the house. Her eyes lingered on the decorations Paula had placed with care. On the photos Bill had removed from shelves. On the robe Gloria was still wearing at the top of the stairs. Her jaw tightened. "We won't take much of your time," Catherine said calmly. "But we will take what's ours," Daniel added. Gloria hurried away, clutching the robe tighter, suddenly aware that she was standing before people who lived in a world she had no map for. Daniel opened his leather portfolio and began laying documents on the dining table. One page, then another, stacks, folders, signatures, contracts, all placed with silent, devastating precision. Bill felt his throat tighten, his breath shorten, his heartbeat quicken. "What is all this?" he demanded, though the words stumbled out with none of the authority he'd used on Paula the night before. Catherine spoke first. "These," she said, tapping the first sheet, "are the founding documents of Meech Holdings." Bill blinked. "That's my company." Daniel stopped arranging the documents just long enough to look at him. "No," he said. "It's Paula's company. Always has been." Bill's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Daniel continued, sliding another set of papers forward. "These are the property deeds for the cars you claim as yours." Catherine's voice followed, smooth and merciless. "And these," she added, laying down another folder, "are the ownership records for this house." Bill stepped back. "What? This can't." Paula didn't. Catherine cut him off quietly. Everything you lived on, she said, her tone colder than the snow outside, was funded, approved, or directly acquired by Paula Rose. Daniel moved closer. Not you, Bill. Not your name. Not your money. Her. He tapped the table. Each tap matched a document. Company file. Car title. Real estate deed. Investment ledger. Board agreement. Foundational shares. Paula. 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 Her name was everywhere. Bill's name, when it appeared at all, was carefully placed beneath hers, never beside and never above. He felt his rib cage tighten around his lungs, as if the truth itself had hands and was squeezing him from the inside. This must be a mistake, he said. I built this. I ran this. Daniel let out a short laugh. You ran nothing. You fronted the public face of the company for exactly 5 years while Paula handled every operation behind the scenes. She did the work, Catherine added. She bore the risk. She invested the capital. She signed every legal document. Bill shook his head, desperate now. She told me she came from a simple background. She did, Catherine replied. Simple does not mean powerless. Daniel rested both hands on the table. I warned her once, he said, that if she ever handed her empire to the wrong man, I would come collect it back. Bill backed away another step. This is insane, he said. She didn't build any empire. Daniel leaned in, eyes sharp. She built yours. Bill's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He remembered the early years. The nights Paula stayed up late at her laptop. The financial calls she dismissed as small tasks. The trips she took to help a friend. The sudden leaps of wealth he assumed came from his great business instincts. He had believed every convenience, every comfortable lie, every gentle silence she offered him, because he wanted to believe the narrative where he was the genius. He was the alpha. He was the architect of their life. He thought Paula simply supported him. He never imagined she built everything from scratch. And built him, too. Daniel closed the folder. Catherine folded her hands. The room felt too small, too bright, too revealing. Bill swallowed hard. So what happens now? He whispered. Daniel looked at his sister's signature on the final document, a signature that carried more weight than Bill ever realized. What happens now? Daniel repeated. Now you realize the truth. Catherine spoke the final blow. She didn't steal your empire, Bill. Daniel finished the sentence. She built it. Bill froze, completely, utterly still, as the world he thought he ruled folded in on itself. In the silence that followed, the truth settled around him like a verdict. Paula had never been the small woman he thought she was. She had never been the spare piece in his story. She was the foundation. And he had been living in a house of cards the entire time. A house she built. A house she could collapse. And as her siblings gathered the documents into one undeniable truth, Bill finally understood. He had not married a meek woman. He had married a rose. And roses were not fragile. They were thorns. And Paula's thorns were only beginning to show. The front doors opened with a slow, commanding creak. Not loud, not rushed, not dramatic. Just enough sound to shift the air. Enough to make the chandelier tremble. Enough to make Bill's bones recognize a threat before his mind even understood why. Daniel and Catherine didn't react. They simply stepped aside as if the moment had been scheduled, rehearsed, inevitable. Bill turned toward the doorway, and his heart dropped into his stomach. Vivian Rose Huntington stepped inside. Not walked, entered. Like royalty returning to a throne. Like a storm slipping through a crack in the sky. Like a verdict dressed in silk and diamonds. She wore a long winter coat, snow melting on the shoulders, each drop sliding off fabric woven too fine, too expensive, too powerful for ordinary weather to cling to. Her gloves were removed one finger at a time, an unhurried ritual that filled the foyer with a tension so thick Bill felt it press against his chest. Her eyes swept the room, not frantic, not searching, assessing, calculating. The eyes of a woman who'd been underestimated by empires, not men. Eyes that saw every secret, every detail, every weakness in the space of a heartbeat. Her gaze landed on Bill last, like a blade choosing where to cut. He instinctively stood straighter, tugging at his robe, Paula's robe, feeling suddenly childish, foolish, and exposed. Catherine stepped forward. "Mother." Vivian raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. Even Daniel paused. Even the house itself seemed to bow. Vivian walked deeper into the foyer, setting her leather bag gently on the table between all the documents. Paula's signatures, Paula's deeds, Paula's empire laid out in perfect order. Bill opened his mouth to speak because silence felt more dangerous than any words he could offer. "Mrs. Huntington." Her head tilted, not sharply, not cruelly, just enough to remind him that she hadn't granted him permission to speak. Bill's throat closed. Vivian removed her coat, revealing a deep emerald dress tailored with the precision of someone who knew presentation was power. The color alone commanded attention. It was the shade of wealth older than banks, older than governments, older than the house Bill was standing in. She placed her coat over the back of a chair. Every motion silent, precise, deadly, the way only grace can be when it belongs to a woman who knows she has won before the battle begins. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, smooth, elegant, like glass polished over decades. But every word was a cut. "You threw away the wife who made you." Bill felt the sentence hit him physically. Cold, exact, inescapable. Vivian's heels clicked against the marble as she circled the table, glancing at each document, each signature, each confirmation that Paula had been the architect of everything Bill bragged about. "You threw away the woman," she continued, "who built the foundation beneath your feet, and then invited another woman into her home while she was still in it." Her eyes flicked up, and Bill felt something primal inside him shrink. Vivian didn't glare. Vivian didn't raise her voice. Her disappointment was far more terrifying. "And now," she said, placing a hand lightly atop the stack of deeds, "you will watch the life she built fall from your grasp, piece by piece, inch by inch, breath by breath." Bill swallowed hard, sweat gathering at the base of his neck, even though the house was cool. "Mrs. Huntington, with all due respect, Paula and I, things were difficult, and—" Vivian turned fully toward him. The room froze. Her stare landed on him like the quiet drop of a guillotine. "Do not," she said softly, "attempt to rewrite your sins in my presence." Bill opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Her gaze held him pinned, not with aggression, with certainty, with knowledge, with memory older than his entire career. "You humiliated her," Vivian continued, voice steady. "You diminished her. You dismissed her. And then you discarded her as if she were unworthy of the kingdom she built around you." Bill tried again. "Paula never told me. She never said anything about." Vivian cut him off with a single step closer. "She did not need to tell you who she was," she said. "You should have seen it." Her tone hardened, not loud, but carved from stone. "You should have recognized her brilliance, her sacrifice, her strength. Instead, you mistook her kindness for weakness. You mistook her silence for emptiness. You mistook her love for dependence." She took one more step. Now she stood directly in front of him. Bill's breath hitched. Vivian Rose Huntington was not tall, not intimidating by physique, but power radiated from her like heat from a furnace, steady, unrelenting, ancient. She spoke slowly, each word a decisive strike. "You broke a woman who protected you. You betrayed a woman who believed in you. You dishonored a woman who lifted you into a life you could never have reached alone." Daniel watched in silence. Catherine kept her eyes locked on her mother. Even the walls seemed to stand at attention. Bill forced strength into his spine. "I love Paula," he said weakly, "but she changed. She made me feel small." Vivian's laugh was soft, a whisper, a sound that held more truth than Bill's entire argument. "She did not make you feel small," she replied. "She simply revealed the size of the man you always were." He flinched. Vivian reached for the final page on the table, Paula's foundational ownership of the company. She held it between two fingers, as if weighing its significance. "This house," she said, "this company, this wealth, this legacy." Her eyes lifted. "You lived inside her generosity and believed it was your achievement. Bill's knees weakened. "And now," she said gently, "you will watch every piece return to its rightful owner." Bill stepped back, desperation clawing at his voice. You can't do this. You can't." Vivian stopped him with a look so icy it felt like a sentence. "I'm not doing anything," she said. "Paula is." She placed the document back on the table. "And I am simply here," she finished, "to witness the consequences of your choices." The room fell silent. No one breathed. No one moved. Bill felt the world he controlled slipping from his grasp. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with the precise, elegant dismantling of a mother reclaiming her daughter's crown. Vivian turned away from him without another word. She didn't need one. The verdict had already been delivered. By sunset, the world Bill once ruled had crumbled around him, quietly, precisely, and without a single raised voice. The sky outside bled into shades of burnt gold and waning crimson, as if the day itself were closing his chapter with a ceremonial flame. Snow still clung to the edges of the driveway, glowing under the dying light. The cold made everything sharper, every sound clearer, every breath heavier. And there he stood, Bill Kingston, former CEO, former husband, former man of importance. Now, just a figure with one overstuffed suitcase, a coat too thin for December, and eyes that darted around like he expected someone, anyone, to tell him this was a mistake. But no one came. His mistress, Gloria, had fled hours earlier. She left without a note, without a tear, without a backward glance. Only a single text message on his cracked phone. "I can't be with someone who lied to me about who he was. I didn't sign up for this mess." The irony was almost poetic. Bill had traded a wife who built empires for a girl who couldn't stay through 1 hour of chaos. His accounts were frozen by noon. He had discovered it in the worst way possible, standing at the gas station, card declined, the cashier giving him a pitying smile as if he were an old man fallen from grace. His investors had fled by early afternoon, leaving a string of abrupt emails written with corporate coldness. "We cannot proceed with your leadership. Our partnership is terminated effective immediately. This situation compromises the stability of the portfolio." And then, the final blow, "Your role is dissolved. We wish you the best in future endeavors." Future endeavors. He almost laughed. Almost. He didn't have the strength to. By 3 o'clock, the company website had been updated. The press release was short, clean, devastating. Meech Holdings transitions to new leadership. Full control reverts to founder Paula Rose. His name wasn't even mentioned. It wasn't an erasure. It was an obliteration. The kind of erasure only possible when the real founder, the real architect, the real power, returns to sit on her throne. Now, as dusk settled its final light over the property, Bill stood outside the mansion. Her mansion, he now understood, with a suitcase full of clothes that suddenly felt too expensive for him. He kept turning toward the front door, half expecting someone to open it. Daniel, with his cold eyes. Catherine, with her measured authority. Vivian, with the quiet power that made grown men feel like disobedient children. But the door remained closed. Locked. Final. He shifted his weight, shivering. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of snow under his boots, the whisper of wind slithering across the yard, the distant hum of cars on the highway. He had always imagined that if his life collapsed, it would be loud. A dramatic explosion. Headlines. Chaos. He never imagined it would be this quiet. Consequence rarely screams. It whispers. Behind a frosted window on the second floor, a warm light flickered. He lifted his gaze, breath fogging in front of him. Paula stood there. She didn't hide. She didn't turn away. She didn't pretend she wasn't watching. She stood poised, shoulders back, spine straight. A silhouette carved from resilience, not revenge. In her hand was a glass of wine, deep red, rich, the kind she saved for victories. In another lifetime, she would have come outside to help him. She would have asked where he was going. She would have softened, forgiven, reached out. But that lifetime was gone. And Bill knew, in the raw ache swelling in his chest, that she had finally remembered her worth. She lifted the glass slightly, a gesture so small it could have been mistaken for casual movement. But Bill knew better. It was a farewell, a toast, a ceremony marking the end of something that had already been dead long before he threw divorce papers at her. But this wasn't a toast given in hatred, not in pettiness, not in victory. It was something colder, something sadder, something truer, a funeral toast, not for him, not for his career, not for his pride, for the man he used to be, the man she had once believed in, the man she had once protected, the man she had once thought could grow into someone worthy of the empire she built around him. He swallowed hard, throat tight, eyes stinging under the wind's sharp bite. He wished she would yell. He wished she would curse. He wished she would walk outside and demand answers. Anything but this. Anything but the silent goodbye that told him he was no longer a chapter in her story, just a lesson she would never repeat. The front door remained closed. The window remained glowing. Paula remained still, watching him with a calm that should have comforted him, but instead cut deeper than any rage ever could. Bill cleared his throat, a sound too small for the vastness of the moment. "I loved you," he tried to whisper, voice cracking. If she heard, she gave no sign, because love without respect is not love at all, and Paula had finally understood that truth. The last of the daylight faded behind the horizon. The house lights flickered on, warm and steady, filling the estate with a glow that felt protective. Not for him, but from him. Bill looked down at the single suitcase by his feet, his life reduced to a zipper and plastic wheels. He exhaled shakily and took a step back. The house loomed behind him, not as a memory, but as a reminder of what he lost, a reminder of who he betrayed, a reminder of the woman who rebuilt herself while he was busy destroying himself. Inside, Paula took a slow sip of wine, not glorying in his downfall, not celebrating his collapse, simply acknowledging the moment, honoring it, letting it be what it was. The end of an era, the burial of a marriage, the death of the man she once loved. Bill turned away, his figure swallowed by the rising night. Paula stood at the window until he disappeared from view. Then, only then, did she lower her glass. Not in triumph, not in relief, but in closure, a quiet, final toast to a chapter she had outgrown, a farewell to the man he used to be, and the last sunset he would ever witness from her world. The next morning, the city woke to rain, a soft, silver drizzle washing the skyline clean, as if preparing it for something new, something inevitable, something reborn. Paula stepped out of the car in front of Meech Holdings headquarters, her heels clicking against the wet pavement with the steady rhythm of a woman walking back into a throne room she never should have left. The building loomed above her, 40 stories of glass, steel, and arrogance, a monument to a man who once claimed to have built it. In truth, it was a monument to her, and today, the monument would finally bear the correct name. Security guards, executives, interns, every pair of eyes in the lobby froze as she entered. Some widened in recognition, some in disbelief, some in a dawning understanding that felt like witnessing history realigning itself. Whispers rippled across the marble. "Is that her? She's back. She looks different. No, she looks like herself." Paula didn't slow, didn't blink, didn't flinch. She walked as a woman who had stepped through fire and emerged gilded, not burned. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside alone. As it ascended, the city lights flickered across her reflection, sharp, determined, reborn. The woman in the glass didn't look like someone returning after betrayal. She looked like someone reclaiming an empire. When the doors parted on the 40th floor, the board of directors stood waiting. A full assembly, unplanned, unprepared. They had heard whispers. They had seen the documents sent earlier that morning, signatures proving ownership, filings confirming authority, transfers initiated at dawn. And they had seen the press release. Leadership restoration in progress. Founder resumes command. Founder. The word hit them harder than any announcement could. The men and women who once treated her like the CEO's soft-spoken wife now straightened their ties, smoothed their jackets, and bowed their heads instinctively as she walked past. "Mrs. Rose," the chairman began, voice wavering. We didn't know." She lifted a hand. Graceful, quiet, final. I'm not here to discuss what you didn't know, she said calmly. I'm here to correct what you were never told. Her voice carried through the corridor like silk drawn across steel. The boardroom door swung open. Paula entered, Daniel already seated at the far end of the long table, eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. Catherine sat beside him, posture perfect, expression unreadable. This was not a takeover. This was a coronation. Paula approached the head of the table, not the chair once occupied by her husband. The real head, the founder's seat. She placed her hands on its back for one breath. One long, grounding breath. Then she sat. A shiver ran through the room. Not fear, recognition. Daniel opened his folder, sliding a thick document forward. As requested, Catherine set down a stamp. Crimson wax, gold seal. The final signature of truth. Paula's gaze swept the documents. Hundreds of pages documenting the reality she had hidden for far too long. Contracts she had drafted. Deals she had closed. Investments she had made with her own inherited capital. Intellectual property she had created. Licenses under her name. Patents. Strategies. Foundations. Every line exposed the truth. She had not just supported the empire. She was the empire. She picked up the pen. The board held their breath. Her signature flowed across the page with a grace that felt almost ceremonial. Her first act as rightful founder was also her first declaration. Remove his name. Forever. Daniel pressed the seal into the wax. Catherine slid the completed decree to the center of the table. Silence fell, a silence that felt like the final breath of Meech Holdings. Paula stood slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice soft, controlled, lethal in its certainty, "Meech Holdings no longer exists." A ripple of shock surged through the board. She walked to the end of the room and pressed a button on the wall. The projector flickered to life, illuminating a new logo, white, gold, powerful. A single word beneath it. Rosecore. Bold. Regal. Unapologetic. A name that didn't hide its roots. A name that didn't lie about its origins. A name that carried the legacy of the woman who built it. "This company," Paula continued, "was born from my labor, my vision, and my resources. For years, my work was credited to someone else. That ends today. No one dared speak. No one blinked. Even the air felt reverent." She stepped closer to the screen, her shadow merging with a new emblem. Rosecore will move forward with transparency, innovation, and leadership that reflects its true foundation. Her eyes swept the room, sharp, unyielding. Anyone unwilling to adapt to that truth may tender their resignation now. There will be no retaliation, but there will also be no place in the future for those who benefited from the lie. A few chairs shifted nervously. None stood. Paula nodded once. "Good." She turned to Daniel. "Begin the restructuring." He smiled slightly. "Already done." She turned to Catherine. "Legal reinforcement?" "In motion," Catherine replied. "Every false signature has been voided. Every misappropriated credit returned. Every stolen contribution restored." Paula exhaled, a breath she felt in her bones. For the first time in months, she did not feel small. For the first time in years, she did not feel overshadowed. For the first time in forever, she felt visible. Recognized. Reclaimed. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Cars moved like rivers of light. Skyscrapers pierced the clouds. The world below buzzed with an energy she once thought she needed permission to command. But now she understood something profoundly simple. She had never needed permission. Not from her ex-husband. Not from the board. Not from the world. She had only needed to step into what had always been hers. Behind her, Daniel and Catherine talked logistics, transition plans, press strategies, global messaging. But Paula heard none of it. She heard only the quiet hum of the city and the beating of her own steady heart. A woman rising, not from heartbreak, not from revenge, not from rage, but from truth. The world finally saw who had been behind the genius all along. Paula Rose was not the CEO's wife. She was the architect of the empire. She was the founder. She was the powerhouse. She was Rosecore. And now, the world would know her name. The night was unnaturally still. The kind of stillness that presses against the windows, settles across the floors, and wraps itself around the walls like a velvet warning. Shadows stretched long across the hallway as Paula walked toward the living room, the quiet echo of her footsteps the only sound in the mansion. She had just finished reviewing the final transition papers for Rosecore. A sense of peace, rare, fragile, powerful, rested in her chest like a soft ember. Then she heard it. 3 knocks. Not loud, not frantic, but heavy, weighted, exhausted, broken. She paused at the base of the stairs, her hand resting lightly on the railing. No one ever knocked on this door anymore. Her family didn't need to. Her staff wouldn't dare. Her world had changed, and the kind of people who visited at this hour were not people she invited. The knocking came again, this time slower. Sad. She opened the door. There he was, Bill, but not the Bill she once knew. The man who strutted through this doorway with false confidence and loud opinions, wearing expensive suits and entitlement like they were part of his skin. This Bill was different. His coat hung off him like a burden. His eyes were hollow, sunken, lost. His hands trembled, as if he had been walking for hours in the cold, carrying nothing but regret. He looked smaller, not in size, but in spirit. "Paula," he whispered, voice cracking like an old photograph. "Please." The porch light flickered above them, casting his face into shifting shadows. For a moment, she wondered if he had rehearsed this moment, or if desperation had finally broken through his pride. "I just need you to know I'm sorry." The words spilled out in fragments, barely held together, like glass falling from trembling fingers. Paula stood still. She did not step forward. She did not reach for him. She did not let her heart sway toward the familiar ache. She simply observed him, this man who had once been her entire world, now reduced to a quiet echo of the life she'd carried for both of them. Bill swallowed, tears threatening to rise. I never understood what you were doing for me. For us. I never understood how much you built. I never saw it. And now," his voice broke, "I see everything." Paula inhaled slowly. The memories flickered through her mind like old film reels. Early mornings spent drafting proposals, late nights whispering encouragement into his exhausted pride, the quiet sacrifices, the silent wounds, the heartbreak that accumulated like dust in forgotten corners of their marriage. But she didn't feel the old pain anymore. She felt distance, strength, clarity. She had climbed out of the fire he threw her into, not burnt, not broken, but refined. A woman reborn. He took a shaky step closer. "Paula, please say something. Anything." She looked at him, and the quiet between them grew heavy with truths unspoken. She could have screamed. She could have cried. She could have recounted every insult, every betrayal, every moment she swallowed pain so he could feel tall. But she didn't, because she wasn't that woman anymore. Her voice, when it came, was soft, a whisper carried on calm winds, a truth without cruelty, a sentence sharper than any blade. "You love the life I gave you," she said, holding his gaze steadily, "not me." The world paused on its axis. Bill's breath hitched. His shoulders crumpled. His face cracked open with the kind of grief that doesn't make sound. For a moment, the night itself seemed to mourn. Paula didn't move. She didn't tremble. She didn't apologize for the truth. Instead, she stepped back, her hand resting lightly on the door. Not in anger, not in vengeance, not in coldness. In closure. Real closure. The kind people spend years searching for. Bill took another half step forward, but she raised her hand slightly, not in warning, but in acceptance. This was the end. Not a dramatic ending. Not a violent one. Not a bitter one. A full circle ending. A healed ending. "Goodbye, Bill." His lips parted, desperate to fix, to explain, to reverse a lifetime of choices. But Paula had already turned. She pushed the door gently. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then it closed. Softly. Firmly. Finally. Not out of hatred. Not out of spite. But because the woman behind it was no longer the wife who shrank to make a man feel big. She was the rose. Beautiful. Dangerous. Impossible to burn. She leaned against the door for a moment, letting the silence settle around her like a final benediction. Then she walked deeper into the home she built. Her home, her empire, her rebirth. Outside, Bill stood alone. Inside, Paula stepped into the light. She had just begun. But what Paula didn't know was that her story wasn't done. Because someone else was watching that final door close. Someone who knew the truth about her past and wasn't ready to let it go. Thank you for watching this story to the end. Subscribe for more powerful story like if Paula inspired you. Stay tuned. Your next story is already unfolding.